It's a tremendous honor to be here. It's a tremendous honor to serve in the legislature, to have the opportunity to serve with Representative Gary Glenn. We just have a very excellent group of people within the legislature who are working hard every day to do good work. And I wanted to present my comments tonight basically to outline some of those things that we've done, and more importantly probably talk about some of the things we're looking at doing going forward. And then at the end I'd like to leave a fair amount of time for questions. That's for me the most interesting part. I hope for you as well, so that I'm not making assumptions about what you want to hear, but rather taking your questions that you have. You know, as was mentioned, when I ran first for office in 2010, I had never planned to run for political office. At that point, I was about 31 years old, 32 when I ran, and had never pursued local elected office, and it was never in my grand plan. I was practicing law in downtown Mount Pleasant and very happy doing what I was doing. But if you take yourselves back to where we were in 2009, it was the end of 2009 when I made that decision. You know, where Michigan was at that time was at the worst end of the recession. Things in Michigan were so bad, whether you look at, pick your metric. For me, the biggest thing, it wasn't just our unemployment rate. It wasn't just the incredibly messed up economic development policies that existed in this state. It was just so many things about what we like to refer to now as the lost decade or the Granholm administration that was so incredibly devastating to not only our present at that time, but our future. And it was the future that most concerned me. At that time, my wife and I were a young married couple and looking forward to starting a family. And what we had affect our family was the same thing that affected so many other families across this state. And that was that we were losing friends and family members who were leaving this state in pursuit of jobs. A great freedom that we all enjoy is the ability to move freely amongst this country. And I think it's a great freedom that we can exercise at our will. But it's so unfortunate when people are forced to move because there are not jobs and opportunity here in this state. And as we were having conversations amongst ourselves, we said, what is this going to look like in the future when we start that family? What is it going to look like 10, 20, 30 years down the road as our family grows? And I said, you know what? I've never pursued public office before, but now is the time. I've been an observer for a long time. I've been concerned for a long time. And I'm going to raise my hand, and if the people will elect me, I'm going to serve and try to be part of turning this state around. And I think one of the things that we talked about openly at that time was that we had to change the culture in this state. We had to change the laws in this state. We had to change the regulatory framework in the state, because before Michigan could be a great state in which to create a job, or to find a job, it had to be a great state in which to create a job. And that's not a chicken or the egg thing. I'll say that again, especially since I messed it up the first time through, but because, before Michigan could be a great state in which to find a job, it had to be a great state in which to create a job. And so many things that we needed to change were our regulatory structure, our tax structure, other things, as was mentioned, making Michigan a right-to-work state. That is something that I campaigned on and campaigned openly on in my very first campaign. And I have to tell you, and I'll be open with this group, I didn't think that was possible. I didn't think it was possible that the state of Michigan could be the 24th right-to-work state in this country. And it is so critically important. And I was saying throughout the debate on this, if you fall into the argument, and I think you can make a great case about the economics behind right to work and what it brings about, you don't even have to get that far. You can talk about the fact that it's simply the right to make a choice. It's freedom to work. And that is something that, as that process began to come together, I have to tell you, I think that's one of the most, long-term, going to be one of the most significant votes that I cast. And it was such a great opportunity to be part of that group and to watch how that came together, making Michigan the 24th right-to-work state. Shortly thereafter, Wisconsin, another Midwest state, became the 25th. Unfortunately, Missouri fell a bit short last year. Hopefully going to take another run at that, and we're hearing about West Virginia at 26th. And so it's just about allowing workers to have a choice. And why should we have to have a captive audience? I say, it's really even worse than a monopoly. Because when in a monopoly, in that situation, it simply says if you want a good or service, you have but one choice. Well, here, it's worse. There's one choice, and you must have it. And so it comes down to worker freedom. Some other things that we've been able to do. And the Mackinac Center has been a tremendous partner in so many of these fronts, because it's not only about getting good information from the Mackinac Center, but it's also about the messaging. It's about putting information out there to the public so that they can have a source for facts. One situation that we took up this year in the House, or this last year, start of this term, was the situation having to do with film credits in Michigan. Now, I use the term film credits because that's what most people know it by, but I'll call it what it is. It was film subsidies, okay? And this was a program during the Granholm years, again, that was an act of desperation in an effort to try to bring people investment in from outside of the state and try to make Michigan the next Hollywood. Well, that experience didn't go so well. Unfortunately, it cost us about $500 million with a B to learn that lesson. This is another one that was so entrenched that I questioned whether Representative Glenn and I and the rest of our colleagues in the caucus would be able to make this go away, to repeal it. But it was led by the House, and ultimately we were able to get this done. Because how offensive is it in a situation such as that, where the state is taking your tax dollars and redirecting them to, in this case, Hollywood film companies, in an effort to try to attract them to our state to do business. And we knew that when the money went away, they were going to go away. This was not creating long-standing jobs here in this great state. And you know, unfortunately, it took $500 million to get to that point, but that was another big change that we were able to make, and it was through efforts of the Mackinac Center and others to educate the public just about what this was. You know, you look at basically where our state was, and I talked about some of those changes that were made. And I think it's important, not only was it important then, but it's important as we go forward for us, you know, as policymakers, to truly understand that the government does not create jobs. Our role in that is to simply create an environment conducive to job growth. And there's a major distinction between that. If you look at this as government's role to create jobs, that's where we get a lot of bad decisions. That's where a lot of bad decisions come about. But if our role is to create the environment, now that is a great distinction. That's to say, okay, we need to take away regulatory barriers. We need to look at the way that we tax. In this case, we made some pretty drastic changes to the Michigan business tax. These are all factors that have gone into you know, this recovery. And so while Michigan was amongst the hardest hit during the Great Recession, we are actually leading. We are leading much of the country out of this recession. It's because of good policies that have been put in place. The fact that we're now starting to get people back, we're actually starting to bring people back to the state of Michigan. And how offensive was it that Michigan was the only state during the last census that actually lost population? That's something that we should take very personal. And so I think a lot of these decisions were a bit easy to make because they came about through desperation. It was the desperate times that we were in. People were willing to make really tough decisions. And I think now that things have improved somewhat, we still have a long way to go, but it can be easy to become complacent. And complacency, I feel, is our biggest threat. Because to the extent that we start to change course and we start to undo some of what we've done and we start to get off track, that's going to be a real threat. That's going to be a real threat for us. And so I think it's important that we keep that focus going forward, and that as you're talking to your elected representation, that you know, we don't lose sight of tough decisions that have been made, and we keep pushing the ball forward. You know, I talked about another form of credit or major subsidy is a situation that we had in this state that we were able to do away with at the beginning of Governor Snyder's term, and that was this issue of mega tax credits. Now, mega I share with you not as an adjective, while they are mega, that's actually what the program was called. And this was giving away money, again, to, you know, during the recession it was about trying to retain jobs that were here and also to try to attract jobs from outside of the state. And this is a practice that we're getting away from now that we've actually ended the program. But the problem is we're going to be paying on this for quite a long time as these credits come due, and we're talking about huge sums of money. This is something that we've got to buy our way out of. Unfortunately. And I think it's just such better tax policy to look at broader applicability of policies and looking at trying to improve the state for people that have fought with us through the recession. Look at all of the individuals in the state. Look at all of the businesses up and down any Main Street, and you'll see people that weathered the storm with us. And those are the people that we need to be partnering with and working for, not working at their expense by providing these giveaways to others. You know, right now we're at a point, we have some other issues that are taking up a lot of attention right now in the way of situations with the water situation in the city of Flint. We also have the fiscal disaster that is the Detroit public school system. While all of that is still playing out, we also have important work to do on our state's budget. And I think that this is the single most important function of a state government, of a state legislature, is passing the budget. And this is an improvement that we've made, and we can still go further. But I think the budget itself aside, just the timeline under which we have been able to pass budgets in this state has been a huge improvement from where we were in the last administration. If you'll recall, in 2007 and 2009, we actually had brief state government shutdowns as a result of the state not being able to craft a budget by October 1, which is the start of the state's fiscal year. And when we came in office with this governor, Republican majority in the House, we said, you know, we're going to set a new standard in Michigan. And this is another thing that I thought may be unattainable, but was to pass a budget by June 1st. You know, the governor makes his recommendation on or about February, and then we should be able to pass that by June 1st. Well, we've now done it 5 years, by early June, not always June 1st, but by early June, passing balanced budgets and getting it done early in the process so that not only are we not shutting down the government, but also that you know, schools and local governments and others receiving state appropriations actually know what their state level of support is going to be before we require them to pass their budgets. And so we're using the tagline now of 5 for 5, kind of infringing on Arby's tagline for selling roast beef sandwiches. But we can do it again, and we're going to do this a 6th year. We're going to pass a budget, and we're going to be looking to continue the work that really took off last year. This last budget that we passed in June of last year is the budget of the 5 that I'm most proud of. I think that it is what I like to call a priorities budget, and we're finally prioritizing spending in the state. And there's still more work that can be done there, certainly. But looking at priorities. Now, what really should be the priorities of the state? What is the role of state government? That's really what we're getting to here when we talk about priorities. You know, and I've always thought the priorities of state government, the role of state government should be education, public safety, and roads or infrastructure. And this last budget, while you know, some on the outside would lead you to believe otherwise, was actually the largest amount of education that we've ever spent, K-12 education. We put additional money into the roads. We were able to take a large sum of the general fund and put that to roads, which I think is important because then it can't be spent on other projects. And then also looking at the area of public safety. And so I think that's some important work that we can continue going forward in the start of this month. Actually, the governor will put out his executive recommendation on February 10th. And then we'll be doing work with that budget. You know, as far as other things that we'll be working on this year, one thing that we did in January of last year, something that I'm very proud of as well, is as a caucus, we put together an agenda. And we actually put this agenda out there to the public. Released it at a press conference, put it on our website at gophouse.org if you have an interest in looking at this. But I think that this is an important exercise for multiple reasons. And I think it takes some strength and some nerve, frankly, to put out an agenda and tell the people where it is that you're going to go. And I think that you really can't have accountability without transparency. The reason I say that is I could hold a press conference at the end of the term and I could tell the people we accomplished everything that was on our agenda. But how can you hold me accountable if we were not transparent on the front end to tell you where we wanted to go? And this is not a fluff agenda. If you're to look at it, we call it our House Action Plan. 78 items that are included in it. To this point, we're a little over 50%, and then the number of those 78 items, so a little over half, that have been actually passed by the House. And we put some bold things in here. I'll share with you an example, and I hope that this will convince you that this is not full of fluff, is that our first priority, the first bill that was introduced in the House and in the Senate at the start of this last term, it's also included in our agenda, is the repeal of prevailing wage law in this state. That's something that we have some additional work ahead of us to be able to complete. But my hope is that we will get the opportunity to do just that. And I think that it's really about responsible spending, being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And that's something that will be a big reform if we're able to move that forward. You know, some other reforms, we're looking at criminal justice reforms. Throughout the budget process, each time this comes up, we often hear from citizens that have concerns about a funding cut in a particular area. They will often say, well, why don't you just take the money from the prisons? Why don't you just take the money from the Department of Corrections? And it's really a department that gets the heat for so many things, just because people will say, well, you know, that you're spending $2 billion or just shy of $2 billion a year on incarceration. And I say, you know what, that is a huge number. And we do need to take steps to try to do corrections better. Now, it's a delicate balance because we can't just open the doors and let the inmates out. That's part of the state government's function in public safety, is to say, how can we get smarter about corrections? And one thing that we can do, a bill that we passed in the House, is looking at this concept of presumptive parole. And saying, as you look at Michigan, we sentence people on a range. There's a minimum. You have a term of years, 15 to 20. 15 to 25, whatever the case may be. And we have so many throughout that parole process that are ranked by the parole board that do, for all intents and purposes are quote-unquote model inmates, but are not being released at their earliest release date. And so we need to look at that and say that if people are meeting the requirements, they're not offending further while in our prison system, and they were given a minimum has to mean something. And that's something that I think that we can look at and say, how can we do this without, again, jeopardizing public safety? We're trying to get smarter as well when it comes to violent crimes, really any crimes, having to do with really this intersection of mental health issues and our correction system. That's a very challenging situation. That is very, very difficult because so many of our incarcerated, whether they be at the local level in county jails or they be in the state prisons, there is a large portion of that population that suffers from mental health issues. And so we need to look at those, and we have a system now for doing that in our mental health courts, something that I was part of sponsoring here a few years ago. And it's a system by which we can try to do a better job on the front end of evaluating offenders and saying, is there a path through treatment to rehabilitate this person versus just locking them up? And so we're trying to always think of how can we get smarter about this area of corrections and incarceration. Several other matters that we're working on. I'll, rather than go into great detail on a laundry list of items, I think what I'd like to do is to open it up to some questions. Let's see what thoughts, whether they be comments or questions, frankly. What's on your mind, and then what can I do to try to answer those questions? Yes, sir.
I have not heard any elected officials talking about these past promises that have been made by politicians within different bodies within the state of Michigan that have put us in a bind where a city or a county or a school district ends up overpromising, and then it becomes a crisis that the state has to come in and get a handle on it at some point, only out of necessity, to take care of it. Why can't we do something on the front end? Why can't the legislature look at how can we insist that public bodies within the state of Michigan cannot overpromise? Is there a method, I haven't heard of anybody coming up with an idea that would avoid that happening in the future, because that's what's going to be the big cost to our kids, making up for these damn promises that have been made that nobody was accountable for.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think some work has been done, but much more can be done. And what I mean by that, probably the single largest area has to do with the legacy cost, as far as looking at retirement plans, pension system, retiree health care. This is something that we have made some progress on. If you look at, for example, school employee and state government employees, changes have been made there. For example, it actually was under Governor Engler back in 1997. The state employees, and we have about 46,000 state employees, have gone to the legislature at that time went to a 401k style system. We've made some changes now so that all new hires are in that style of a system. But this is something that we need to look at doing on a broader, I think to your point, on a broader platform, looking at even local governments and saying, when a situation arose like the city of Detroit, for example, that was ultimately settled in the grand bargain to the bankruptcy litigation that was going on just a year or two ago. That's exactly the situation. That's what happened. There was such a huge unfunded liability that was created that we have to avoid that. And so we can look at doing that from a couple of fronts. One would be to prohibit the practice of a pension style defined benefit program, but also to have closer monitoring. Some of that has already taken place with Treasury doing closer monitoring of the financial health of these entities, but I think we need to go further. Yes?
In the discussions of funding the state's roads, toll roads were never mentioned. Why is this?
Yeah, so the question, and I'll repeat the questions because I know we're taping. So the question is about while the road funding debate was going on, there was no mention of toll roads, and why is that? It's a couple-fold, and maybe it's even more reason than I'm aware. A couple of the reasons are, one, that if a road has been funded with federal dollars, that we have to get federal approval to be able to create a toll road. Where it would work the best is if we had new routes that were going in. And frankly, the thought there was that we probably don't need new routes at this point, but rather we need to take care of the roads that we have. And so I think another challenge that Michigan would have is many other states benefit from the fact that they're pass-through states, where Michigan is basically a destination state. I mean, we're here not because we're passing through like Ohio and Pennsylvania and other states, but it becomes a bit more of a challenge. I think we're putting in large part, not in totality, but in large part, putting the burden on our own residents and having to make these tolls. So what we try to do with the roads plan, and I'll concede, I think that anyone, myself included, could look at this roads plan that was passed and could point to parts that they don't like, and that's a very fair point, and it's a very true point. But I think that, yes, sir?
Well, I've seen all of the traffic from Ohio and Indiana going north for vacations to Michigan.
Sure, as far as potential out-of-state contribution to the toll roads, sure. Yeah, and if I can, I'd like to transition into, I think that brings up a good point about this roads plan. But this has been an issue that was probably the single largest unaddressed issue in the legislature in the 5 years that I was there at that point in time. And, there was a cost to not acting. All of us had our ideas for the plans that we would like to see. Some of us wanted to do it all, from reprioritization of existing money, doing it without tax increases. There were others that wanted to see all of the money come from new taxes, and it was really that stalemate that was preventing us from addressing the problem. And there really is a cost to not acting, because we're allowing the roads to deteriorate further, and then the cost to repair really goes up exponentially. And so ultimately what we were able to do, I think, in light of the situation as it existed at the state with the House, the Senate, and the governor, and what all of the respective parties were looking for, I think we got a much better outcome than what it could have been. The governor was very open in his position on this, and he put it out there publicly back in about 2011 or 12, and that was that it should all come from new revenue in the way of the gas tax and registration fees. And in the House we pushed back against that, and ultimately we pitched a plan that was down the middle, as far as half from existing money, half from new money. But really, when you look at the tax credits that were included in that with the homestead property tax credit, it actually was a little bit better than a 50-50. It was about $400 million new revenue, and about $800 went offset for existing money. And as I mentioned, I think it's important too that we took some of that general fund. So the state has, before this move, a general fund of about $10 billion, a little less than that we make the spending decisions for each year. And there are two schools of thought on this. Some feel that is a problem because the legislature has control over less and less money to the extent that it is reduced. And I think it's actually a great benefit, because to the extent that we tie up that money and we put it into a priority area, such as roads, we take it out of the pot that we can get our hands into, and we, by law, dictate where it must go. The only way that can change then is if there's enough support in both chambers and the governor, so that we have that level of security. They would have to make a policy change. But I think to the extent that we shrink that pot, then we have less and less opportunities to make bad spending decisions on things such as credit programs and things of this nature. So I think it actually serves a benefit when we can get some of that general fund out of the pot and put it into a priority area. Yes.
So what do you think is going to happen to the $400 million that you found in the general fund to support roads now that you have a permanent funding solution?
What is going to happen to the $400 million going forward?
Yeah.
So as far, are you saying the $400 million that...
So there's going to be $400 million in general fund money spent on the roads in this fiscal year.
Yes.
And then next year, there's going to be some taxes and then and some earmarking filling that up. So theoretically, the $400 million gets freed up to spend however you want in this upcoming budget. Okay,
I see what you're saying. So with the plan that we passed, before we passed that plan, we passed that year's budget, and we were able to, as you indicated, dedicate $400 million of one-time money 2 roads. The problem is that money is not necessarily reoccurring through surpluses and other things, so it was a single year victory. So what we did with this plan was actually to make that permanent. And that's what we were able to get the level of support for. This is something that had really just enough support to get through the House. If we were to hold out for further restriction, I think we would probably still be debating the roads issue.
I'm Ed Fisher, and I'm a volunteer veteran service officer. And I've been receiving several complaints about the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency. And is there an oversight committee?
There is. There's.
Is there a House Oversight Committee?
There is. We have, in addition to the Veterans Affairs Committee, we also have a Oversight and Ethics Committee.
The Veterans Affairs Committee isn't doing their job. The Michigan Veterans Affairs. That's my story from the street. That's what I'm hearing from the street and from other veteran service officers that were let go. And it's not working. I've got some evidence here. I've got a letter here that was sent to Governor Snyder, and it's about 10 pages, but it doesn't have an executive summary, and it's not written very well. But there's a lot of information here, and this isn't about money, it's about helping veterans get their...
I'd like to get that information from you, and I will be around afterward. I'd like to get that from you. I'd like to take a look at what you have.
This is very serious. For example, I am a 100% disabled combat veteran. I served in Vietnam in the infantry. I've got 180% of service-connected disabilities, including PTSD, leukemia, hypertension, tinnitus, and hearing loss. The government sends me $3,415 every month. And I spend that, that's $42,000 a year, tax-free. And I spend that money here in this state. We should be on top of this, okay? The government, by federal law, these veterans are entitled to these benefits. But the process and the procedure are so cumbersome, okay? It took me 4 years to get my disability.
Yeah.
And it's so cumbersome, and I can't believe that now we voted in and are spending $8 million on another government agency.
Yeah, I'd like to take a look at the information you have. And
I don't think anybody's aware of this. We're talking about a lot of money here.
mm-hmm.
Billions of dollars in benefits that would be spent in this state. And it's not easy to get the government, the veterans to come out and do it, because they got to fill out forms, they got to know all the ins and outs and the procedures and the processes, and I became an expert on it. And I'm a volunteer right now. I'm a veteran service officer as a volunteer for the Combat Veterans Motorcycle Association. I'm also a registered professional engineer in the state of Michigan. And I served back in the 60s. But I know what's going on. And I'd like to share this information with you or one of your associates. And we need some help.
Okay, no, I'd like to get that information from you myself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, folks.
No, absolutely. And and what I'd like to do is to find out what you have there, and to find out what we can do at the state level. I know we have an absolutely disastrous situation in how veterans are treated across this country, stemming from some federal challenges. But if there's something we can do at the state level, we would certainly like to look into that.
Just to give you an example, I just had one of my disabilities adjudicated. Took 7 years. I got a letter from the VA court in Washington, D.C., and the American Legion followed that through all the way for 7 years. Think about that.
That's disgraceful.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Absolutely is.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to get that information from you afterward. Yes, sir.
I have a question about automobile insurance reform. Michigan mandates that you have automobile insurance. The healthcare component of medical insurance, of auto insurance, is very high. premium. Many people don't even need this insurance because we've got Affordable Care Act, you've got your health care insurance and so forth. Michigan won't allow Medicare to pay for automobile insurance and medical accidents, this sort of thing. And I sat in on 3 days of hearings with Tom Leonard's committee on automobile insurance reform. And who testified? Lobbyist after lobbyist after lobbyist, and healthcare provider after healthcare provider. There was one person in 6 hours of testimony that was a guy that had automobile insurance who was upset about the rates. Why does the legislature let the lobbyists drive automobile insurance premiums and so forth in the state of Michigan? Why does the legislature listen to people who are paying these excessive rates?
Yes, the issue of auto no-fault insurance in Michigan. This is another issue, and I put this in the same category that Rhodes was in as far as items that have been squarely before us for now these 5 years that I've been there. I think the issue of auto no-fault insurance was there long before I came along. It's something that needs to be changed. I was on that, you mentioned the insurance committee this term. I'm not on it this term as I'm not serving on committees, but last term was on the insurance committee and voted for a bill to reform no-fault insurance in Michigan, and we were unable to get enough votes on the House floor to advance it. This term, the process took a little different route. The Senate went first. They actually passed the bill, came over to the insurance committee, they voted it out. It's now stuck on the House floor again. And this is so frustrating because you're exactly right. Michigan has among the most expensive auto insurance rates in the country because we offer the most extensive benefits. And if you were to speak, and I don't know your background, maybe you are in this field, but if you were to speak to providers or people that are familiar with the rates that are charged, it would probably blow your mind to know that for the exact same service, you can take any service, pick an MRI as one that's often used as an example, and the rates that are charged, the rates that are reimbursed, vary greatly depending on what type of coverage you have. So there's a Medicaid or Medicare rate, there is a workers' compensation rate, there is what is often referred to as the Blue Cross Blue Shield or private, because they're a big power player in the area of negotiating these rates, private insurance rate, and then there is auto accidents. Maybe you've talked to someone, auto no-fault accidents, maybe you've talked to someone who has been in the emergency room with a sustained injury, and oftentimes the question that is asked is, was your injury the result of an auto accident? The reason that question is asked is because the reimbursement rates are so much higher. They're so much higher for the same service, and it's reflected in your rates. So if you were to look right now at your policy, it's often referred to as PIP coverage or personal injury protection coverage. And for that assessment, you pay now $150, the rate is at now, it was $186, but $150 per vehicle per year for that coverage, okay? But how many vehicles can any one of you drive at one time? Yeah, exactly. So if you have 3 vehicles, 4 vehicles, maybe you have some teen drivers, things of this nature, maybe you have multiple vehicles for yourself, you pay that on each vehicle. And the only way that we are going to get reduction in that is if we're willing to reduce some of the benefits that are provided, because Michigan provides unlimited lifetime coverage, where other states have a cap on coverage. Maybe they will offer $50,000 of benefits, maybe it's $100,000 of benefits, but Michigan has unlimited lifetime benefits reimbursed at that very high rate. And it has been an absolute nightmare to try to get enough votes together to change that law.
Kevin?
Yes?
There, at least in my mind, there are 2 issues, and they either intentionally or because people don't understand the issue, combine them. The first issue is the rate at which there's reimbursement. Okay? The second issue is unlimited lifetime coverage.
You're exactly right.
My letter to you was, forget for the moment unlimited lifetime coverage, because that gets everybody's emotions involved and then, tries to kill the issue. But if you build the state is build at Blue Cross Blue Shield rates rather than full retail, in general, an MRI would go from, $3,000 down to $700. That's what I'm talking about, and I don't for the life of me. What we're doing, we are indirectly taxed to support the lifestyle of hospitals, physicians, and anybody else involved in this. That is separate from unlimited lifetime. It is simple. just have the rate, Blue Cross Blue Shield, period. Why is that difficult to get done?
Well, I tell you, I think it goes back to the earlier point that was raised about the number of lobbyists and special interest groups that are in support of the current system. I have to tell you, there are groups and causes that are represented that blow my mind. Every group imaginable has a lobbyist in Lansing, and many of them have an army of them. And this is an issue that we see in some parts of the state in particular, where there are a lot of clinics that provide services that lobby at a very intense rate and are able to convince members that the reform shouldn't be made. But it's something that I think if we're hearing enough from the people that are affected by the rates and less from those that are testifying before the committee, then I hope that we can make some change. It's one thing that I've been looking at now, because this has happened year after year, term after term. We put forward the plans and it doesn't get done. And so I've been looking at this now and saying, okay, how long are we going to allow perfect to be the enemy of good? Because perfection is getting us nothing. We're throwing a lot of incomplete passes here. And so if we can move the ball down the field somewhat, some of the things that we could look at doing is to look at fraud within the system. There's been talk about a fraud authority. There's also been talk about some reforms to attendant care. We have a system of attendant care in the state that is actually very, very generous. And there are a few other things that we could do, but they're not going to create the savings that you're mentioning if we were to reduce rates. And that's just something that we can't get support for.
Reducing rates is simple. It has nothing to do with benefits except to the hospitals and the others who are getting paid, right?
Sir, what you were saying, it sounds like absolute common sense.
And everybody in this room has a vehicle, right? Who the hell is against that?
I can tell you who is against it, and it's actually not, as was mentioned, it's not the insurance companies. It's not the insurance companies. It's beyond the hospitals, but that's a big part of it, but it's also providers beyond hospitals, which is a very large group of people.
Subsidizing that.
You're right. You're right.
All right.
Absolutely.
Let's get them straight. I'm getting the math straight.
Yes.
But there's intentional confusion on this so that, people don't understand it. There's a fog factor that's put in. I'm trying to get through the fog factor. It's tough.
Yeah, your point is exactly right. You could reduce rates without affecting the duration or the total amount over time. But
Divide the issue. Go for one at a time.
And while that is so easy and so common sense, I can assure you that getting the votes for that is something that is currently unattainable, and it's not for a lack of effort. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, you don't do this very often, but I recall that you made it clear it was a personal priority of yours as Speaker to champion an issue that the Mackinac Center had promoted, and that's civil asset forfeiture reform.
Yes.
So I just wanted you to comment on that.
Yes, so the issue of civil asset forfeiture, and this is something that is really getting more and more attention across the country. Something that is actually also being worked on at the federal level. From Michigan, Representative Wahlberg is actually working this issue. And so we took up, actually we made it a priority in our House Action Plan, was to look at civil asset forfeiture and specifically to look at the process and really look at the checks and balances, if you will, or the protections that are in that, because it was really a process that was really slanted against the people of this state when property was taken and then there was not a path through which to get the return of that property. And also to put some additional protections on the front end so that people were not having their stuff taken inappropriately. And so we were able to pass a package in the House, and I think this is really the start of something. It really goes deeper. It's really about individual liberty and having your liberty violated when the government, in this case, is taking property away from individuals without due process. And so, civil asset forfeiture with due process can be very appropriate. But unfortunately, the system allowed for abuses, and that's exactly what we're trying to go toward. Yes?
Mr. Speaker, as a former K-12 school board member and the current chairman of the Board of Trustees for Delta College, I just want to thank you and your House colleagues for your hard work in getting the budget done early. That has made a tremendous difference for us and for me in my role as a community volunteer. The stability and the predictability has helped immensely. And I was in K-12 before the current administration, so I've seen the other side of it, how difficult that made it. So first I want to thank you for that. And then my question is, as we hear people argue against emergency managers and argue for local control, at the same time pointing the finger toward the state, how can we help you to say you can't have it both ways?
Thank you. You can't have it both ways, cannot. And you know, that's something that right now is getting a lot of negative attention because of the two situations I mentioned earlier. You know, the city of Flint, in the crisis there with the water, there was an emergency manager in place, and with Detroit Public Schools has been under an emergency manager for a long period of time in the current situation there. But I think that, you know, those situations aside, the emergency manager, under the changes that we made a handful of years ago, has been a success story in a lot of communities. Now, it's very unfortunate when it has to come to that. And having more proactive checks in place on the front end can help us avoid that. But I can tell you that there have been a lot of communities. One of the first was Benton Harbor, a community that now has a surplus, you know, and was on the brink of financial disaster previously. You look at areas like Ecorse was another one. There have been some good successes. But you know, the role of the emergency manager is one that when things go wrong, they're going to be viewed, as we're seeing currently, as being the one responsible. And so with the situation of Flint, we've got a lot of analysis, a lot of investigation to do to really figure out what happened there. And that is going to be done in great detail because there are so many different groups that are investigating this. In addition to a task force that was put together, the Attorney General of Michigan, Bill Schuette, is investigating. And then at the federal level, we also have investigations, the FBI, Department of Justice, and others, the auditor within the EPA, all investigating. And so we're going to be able to ultimately get facts here that are straight. But to your point, you can't have it both ways. We have to have the ability to go in, hopefully it's in very limited instance, but we have to be able to go in and right the ship in some of these areas, or alternatively, we're going to have more situations like the city of Detroit, not Detroit Public Schools, but the city of Detroit, that actually file for bankruptcy. And that bankruptcy in Detroit was the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of this country. And it's something that at the end of the day, we all paid for. It could have been far worse, but we all paid for that. And so we have to have this emergency manager tool available for the most egregious cases.
Kevin, you mentioned Detroit. That was a long time problem coming.
With the city or Detroit Public Schools? Both, really.
Oh,
Yeah.
it really does make sense. And in general, they're all Democratic administrations. And they're mortgaging the future. You know, you make commitments for the future that other people pay, not you. What can Republicans or others do for preventative measures of this sort of future stealing? Because that's what it is. I don't expect an answer, but can you get people to think about prevention rather than cleaning up a mess after somebody else does it?
Yeah, and you know, I think that is more possible today than it was a handful of years ago. And the reason I say that is if you remember back about 2011 or 12 when we passed the emergency manager law, it's referred to as the emergency manager law, but the emergency manager was not new at that time. This is something that existed long before, going back to Governor Engler and beyond. But we had to strengthen the teeth. We had to give more teeth to the emergency manager to be able to clean up these situations. For example, the ability to open up contracts and renegotiate these contracts, because that goes to the point that was made earlier about these commitments that are made, and they are far too lofty to be sustainable longer term. And so, you know, as far as on the front end, I think we're going to need some support. Something that I have an interest in looking at was the point that I made earlier about, you know, doing some reform in the way of these legacy costs that exist across all units of government, you know, and to say what can we do to transition and close out defined benefit programs and go into defined contribution. You know, defined contribution in the private sector, in the private sector, this is what you find. You know, it's something that the transition was made to a long time ago, and it's a system that can work out very well. But those that have the defined benefit program want to protect that at all costs, and that's a huge threat. In the back.
On that note, with the pensions, and I'm the attorney here, and I haven't been able to figure this answer out, and I don't know if anybody in your office has. And that is, one of the reasons why Detroit was capable of losing some of those pension benefits was it could go bankrupt because it was a municipality as opposed to the state. And MIPSR's is $28.5, I think, billion in the hole right now, which is essentially half of a budget cycle. So is it possible even that any of that money can ever be discharged in bankruptcy? Because is Mixers a bunch of locals, or is it the state? And if it can't be discharged in bankruptcy, what are we ever going to do about this $28.5 billion and essentially growing a little bit every year legacy cost that we currently have?
Yeah, so to your point, it's not several small systems, but rather it is a state retirement program. And so that's the challenge. That's why this issue with Detroit Public Schools is so much different than what we had with the municipal bankruptcy. Because with the municipal bankruptcy, at least there was a question as to whether or not the state was on the hook. It was at least something that was going to be argued. Here it is much clearer when we're dealing with a school system that the state is on the hook. And so the program is severely underfunded, as you mentioned. And that's one of the challenges that is really keeping the plan from being closed out, because we could close out the plan and we could go strictly to a defined contribution plan. The challenge in that is then requirements to make that system whole. So that's been one of the challenges that we've looked at solutions for Detroit Public Schools, and the idea has been put out there about, well, there are 46,000 students currently within Detroit Public Schools. Why don't you just look at chartering? And much of the population has left already to go to charter schools, and that's provided a great opportunity for parents and students. But one of the challenges is first to have providers that can absorb that many students. And then the other part of it is, to the extent that the teachers leave the MIPSERS program and are outside of it, then we have that stranded cost. So we have less people that are contributing toward it. So it's something that we have to try to work through, but it's something that has to be resolved in some way, because as you mentioned, that number in the billions, $28 billion is a huge number, and something that the state is ultimately responsible for. Yes, sir.
You've talked a little bit about pensions and these legacy costs, and somebody made the comment that we kind of see this in these Democrat-run cities, I think was the point. The Mackinac Center did an analysis last year when we looked at the 100 largest municipalities. 99 of them had unfunded liabilities. Where we sit right now in Midland, Michigan, our pension plan for our local police is funded 66%, which is a pretty dangerous level. And I did a program in Midland, and our city manager, they asked, what's the biggest problem you see facing Midland, Michigan? He said, these liability costs that nobody has a handle on. So we're talking about bankruptcy for a lot of these cities that were sped up for a variety of reasons, but almost everyone in this room probably lives in a city that has these unfunded liabilities. What else can the legislature do to help the local levels, either to prevent racking up these liabilities or something along those lines? Because that seems that that's going to be the biggest problem that affects everybody, having services cut that they rely on right now.
Yeah, and I'd be very open to any ideas that you have, having done research in this area, and I know you've done a lot of research. But looking at what the state could do to require a transitioning out of these plans, and maybe it's not something that's done at the flip of a switch, but maybe it's something that we could put in place to bring in over a period of time. But it's something that I think is very important. It's something that we don't have the answers for at this point, and would certainly welcome any thoughts that you have, because I think that's an opportunity not only to prevent this problem from happening again in the future, where we have future situations where we have financial crises, but also it's an opportunity that we could make some change that will have great benefit going forward for a long time to come. One more question? Okay, right here.
I've got an answer for you. 2 parts. Hopefully, like many people in this room, and I like to, and recently Wall Street Journal brought up the fact that the lobbyist population in Michigan is growing exponentially. There's like 3,000 lobbyists. And of course, you're supposed to be our lobbyist, right?
Yes.
And part 2, what do you think of a part-time legislature? I think there's 21 states that have that, including Indiana, and they're doing better than Michigan.
Yeah, as you look at across the country, we have great spectrum of situations. So first, and I'll come back to the lobbyist question, but as far as part-time versus full-time legislature, it's not just 2 options. Really, there's the spectrum in between of how part-time legislature is. We have a full-time legislature, and it's something that I had campaigned on and would support. I've been supportive of the idea of looking at a part-time legislature. As I've been there now, it hasn't changed my position, but it has changed a bit my view, because I do realize some of the challenge, and it goes right to your first point, and it's about you know, with term limits, and I think you really have to have the conversation about term limits in full or part-time legislature in the same conversation, because this population of lobbyists that you mentioned has grown greatly. If you go back to the mid-90s when term limits came in. And I think the reason for that is term limits have brought about a great opportunity. Because if you have members that are serving for a longer term, and I'm not making an argument here to change term limits, but it's just the reality that there's so much turnover, and the lobbyists are empowered because they have an opportunity, really, to educate, if you will. Some do a very good job of actually providing education. Others, it's very biased. But I think that's really what is weakening the legislative branch. I think if we were to go to part-time now, I feel we would weaken it further. Because if you look at, you know, the executive branch, now the governor, it's true, he is also subject to term limits, but if you look at, you know, any administration, not just this governor's, there's a lot of institutional knowledge within that administration that doesn't exist amongst the members who, I'm on my way out the door at the end of this year, you know, 6 years, and I'll tell you openly, I'm still learning every day. So it weakens the legislative branch, is my point. The number of lobbyists does continue to grow. And you know, it's again, I think a situation that has really provided a lobbying opportunity because there is such turnover of the membership.
Was to gain to educate yourself, let's say, in the insurance industry, you probably have assistants, right? Or
Oh yes.
you could tell an assistant, go study this issue and bring me the facts, rather than going to a lobbyist who has his own interest in mind to get the facts from him.
You bet, and we do have. So we have in addition to having staff members in our offices, we also share resources. So across our caucus, we have a policy team, and so we have people that specialize, for example, you know, insurance, transportation, other areas, and so they are our primary source of information. But then, you know, we have lobbyists that come in, and it's important to point out too that it might surprise you all of the groups that are represented. You know, there are many groups right here in our communities that have lobbyists. So take, for example, and I'm not picking on anyone when I share this, I'm just pointing out examples. So take local elected government leaders have lobbyists. Not specific to them, but take the Michigan Township Association, for example, has a lobbyist. The Michigan Clerks Association, so the clerks belong to. The Treasurers Association. Now, I'm not picking on local government, but just sharing with you some examples that it might surprise you that so many groups have lobbyists. And certainly, you know, the corporate interests have lobbying representation, as do unions and so many others.
Kevin, one quick question.
This was my last.
Citizen lobby. Give me a name of a citizen lobby.
Gary Glenn and Kevin Cotter.
You're it? Okay, guys.
Yes. All right. Well, I do. The last question was supposed to be my last, but I want to thank you again. I appreciate this opportunity. I hope you found it helpful or interesting in some way. But again, I want to end where I started, and by very sincerely thanking all of you and thanking the Mackinac Center for being the tremendous resource that you are, and look forward to working with you as we go forward. Thank you all. Thank you.